Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fireside chat, Cyber Risks in 2021 and Predictions for 2022. I'm Chloe Martineau, and joined with me today is our CEO, Mathieu Lavoie, Olivier Michaud, our AI expert, and Alex Viau, our lead developer. And before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to throw them into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and our speakers will get to them at some point in the discussion. So without a further ado, I'll let Mathieu kick things off with kind of explaining the format of our fireside chat.
Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm happy to have this fireside chat today with two of my colleagues, so Olivier and Alex. I'm happy to see new face presenting as well. So I think it's the first time for Olivier to be
first time
to be on the fireside chat. Same thing for Alex. I think he's presenting Alex. So two new presenters. So we're happy to have Alex and Olivier presenting. I'm happy to have Alex and Olivier presenting with me today. This format is a bit more different than the other fireside chats we've been doing. So it's kind of an unmoderated discussion on different themes that we want to debrief on what happened in 2021, as well as emit some prediction for 2022. Or we'll be happy if you comment on the public chat, on the private chat. It's up to you. Feel free to chime in the discussion. Feel free to express your prediction and your read and your debrief on the 2021 event that happened. And we'll definitely try to jump on a little bit on what is in the chat and use that in the discussion as well. We have some themes. We'll be talking about ransomware. We'll be talking about privacy. We'll be talking about AI, since we have our AI expert with us in cybersecurity, as well as security development and dependency management. So those are the kind of the big themes that we'll be discussing around. And as I mentioned, happy to have your input and feedback on the chat. We also have some poll over the chat to kind of try to understand a little bit better, and we're quite frankly a little bit curious to see how you perceive the different topic that we'll be discussing in your day-to-day job. So yeah, I think the first topic it's too big of a topic to pass aside of it, and definitely is ransomware. I think looking backward in 2021, it was definitely a year associated with ransomware. We've seen a lot of the attacks. I think my biggest takeaway of 2021 is we've seen more and more core infrastructure being attacked by ransomware that we wouldn't seen before. That was more organization, and even if you go back a few years ago, it was more like CryptoLocker and actually consumer that were attacked by ransomware. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that. The other big takeaway I'm seeing is I've seen the decrease into in the way that ransomware is being distributed, in the sense that in 2021 we've seen vulnerability being exploited and technology that were fronting the internet being used as the initial access point for ransomware attacks, as opposed to before we have seen more a human error through basically an employee clicking on the link, opening an attachment. And what I'm predicting in 2022 is we'll still continue to see that shift of less of a user being targeted and more the technology and the patch level of the organization being targeted in order to deploy ransomware. And I'm happy to pass it on to Alex. Yeah.
When you say core infrastructure, are you speaking only about the types of bugs or about the actual targets?
I'm speaking more about the actual target. So we see more, like, if we think the biggest example in 2021 is definitely the Colonial Pipeline. That was a core infrastructure of the United system. And on the gas distribution, we see more and more like electrical companies, utilities companies being targeted. We've seen as well big agriculture company and food company being targeted. And we see more of those infrastructure of a country being targeted, as opposed to, as we've seen more before, more like specific companies, SMB companies, organizations being targeted. I'm still predicting that this core infrastructure, as I call it, and the backbone of the backbone infrastructure being targeted.
Do you see a trend in either increasing or decreasing of the reputation damage that ransomware can do to organizations?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'm happy to have your input on that as well, Alex. My take is we've seen ransomware being like kind of a exploiting vulnerability and exposing the data of a company. And I think in terms of attacks and type of attacks and type of monetizing the attack, I think we see more and more disrupting incidents related to ransomware. So what I mean by that is, in order to ask for a payment for a company, the threat is more to disrupt the operation of a company instead of exposing the data. And I think we've seen that shift over the last year, and I think that will still continue to happen.
Looking at the numerous leaks that happened in the previous years, my take on this is that so the damage to reputation is usually lower than I would expect. So, and we see a shift in, for example, like insurance companies stopping to cover ransomware altogether, and like organizations paying less and less. And almost like, I mean, less damage to reputation. So I'm thinking this can explain a little bit why the shift is towards core infrastructure, because this is where
you can create disruption. Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. A few things on that. There's two references that I wanted to share with all of you. The first one is a playbook by the government of Canada, so cyber.dc.ca, that really goes into like explaining a little bit of the attacks, and some interesting takeaway of that is we see the ransomware payment, the average payment for ransomware decreasing over time. So it settled down at $200,000 in average for payment of ransomware in the last quarter of 2021. So that is an interesting takeaway as well. I think
if insurance no longer pays, it has to be like lower amounts.
It's definitely the insurance don't pay. I think some company as well. I mean, I think when you want to express on the impacting the brand and the image, what we've seen is there's so many organizations that were publicly known as being targeted by ransomware that is not necessarily new to the general population of like companies being targeted and being leaked on the dark web and by ransomware groups. I think it's sadly kind of become an habit to see more and more companies being targeted, and I think that also brings me to a prediction for 2022. It's not like it's a prediction that you probably heard already, because I've seen it a lot, and that's the prediction is that in 2022 it will be the year of cyber resilience for organizations. So organizations will be targeted, attacks will happen, and the really what differentiates you in terms of cybersecurity from the rest of the organization is how you respond and remediate and be resilient in front of those increasing attacks.
So you don't see the end of ransomware in 22, nor in 23 and beyond. No,
I'm definitely, we seem the shifting on the approach, on the methods, on the way that bad guys are actually using a vulnerability and are actually having some strategy in order to monetize their attack. But unfortunately, no, we'll still see a continuation, and I think it will continue to be technology that are fronting the internet that will be targeted. So basically, it came back to making sure as an organization that you have a good asset management, a good vulnerability management, and unfortunately, it always comes back to the basic of that. There's no silver bullet in here.
More companies starting to trust employees with less and less data to minimize the potentials of human error and the potential damage.
Yes, and I think it brings back as well. That's already linked to the concept of privacy, like how we make sure that you have the least privilege access and like the right to know, and it's also coming back to how, as an organization, you manage the lifespan of an organization of an information. how do you get that information, how do you keep that information, and how do you discard unnecessary information when it's not needed anymore. So this is really the kind of the concept of the lifespan here. I think that's bring us really into like talking about like which information or where and who's accessing the information. I think it brings us to the GDPR and privacy naturally, and I think it's definitely related to that, of how we can make sure that employees have only the information they need in order to do their task.
One of the prediction I would make is that consumers will start more and more, at least to understand the concerns around privacy. That so usually, I think in the past few years, trusting an org with your data was not seen as bad as it is right now. And so I'm wondering, and I think that in the next few years, customers will start looking for products that have privacy as a feature.
I think people will start asking questions, but I'm not sure they will want to pay for projects they're already like using for free. For example, Facebook. So do you have a thought about it?
I think it's yeah. Go, Alex. I'm curious to hear.
I think, well, I would tend to agree with you that it's not there yet, but if you have to choose, I think privacy is now a characteristic that is understood by most. With the rise of the GDPR last year, it was like kind of a public debate. So if you have a checklist and you're trying to pick between A and B, and one of them has better privacy, maybe has zero trust features where you don't necessarily have to trust the service provider that you're using with your data, and that you're still able to use cloud services. I think it's gonna be a decision changer.
And there's been so much like scandal this year, like Facebook, I think. Do you think there will be like some kind of regularization, like with the Senate and everything, to kind of do some privacy rules?
I think this is how I'm seeing, like, this is how we've seen privacy being enforced in company in the past, and I think it's an interesting point, and I'll probably touch a little bit on everything that has been said already, but I think there's a bigger sense of awareness in the general population concerning privacy. I think it's becoming a competitive advantage for organization and to put that forward and say, hey, I have a good privacy practice in place, and basically be a sales argument and be a commercial argument compared to another competitor. And I think this is encouraging, in my opinion, that we see that being important for more and more people, and actually consider it in the balance of a choice between A and B. I think what I'm seeing shift right now is it's passed through to the politics. So basically, how I'm seeing is people are more aware of that. They don't necessarily know where to start, what they can do about it. What actually came out of that is some pressure into more the political landscape of like, hey, I want to have more control of my data and more privacy enforced at organization level. Therefore, regulation like GDPR put in place, and organization need to comply with it. So that's kind of the balancing the loop.
If there are two drivers if there are two drivers that push privacy forward, one of them being, for example, like past data leaks and like past damage to reputation and increased awareness, and then just compliance. I think compliance is going to be the one that pushes privacy forward the most.
People, this is how you can probably enforce good practice in terms of privacy for organization, is through regulation by a political willingness. I think in 2021, what I'm seeing, if I'm looking backwards, is an increasing awareness of privacy and how much the data works and how it can be used by a company in order to monetize the data. I think this is kind of has been an eye-opener for a lot of people. I think I'm encouraged by that, but what I'm seeing in 2022 is more people now becoming aware, starting to educate on what they can do. Unfortunately, right now, and again, I don't want to put some glasses on, but I think people will get more and more educated, but there's kind of this gap of more and more people will actually take some action in regard to that, but we need to make sure that it don't affect the usability of it. Like if you're taking back the Facebook example,
it's a bit why I think compliance makes more of a difference, because all products have to eventually comply, and I can can see the trend. I would expect that this year more and more it affects B2B, like B2B sales. For example, if you're looking for a provider and you have to be GDPR compliant, if you're looking for if you're providing a service to your users and then you're using other providers to provide it, they all have to be compliant. It's going to become also so privacy features are going to become an important selling point in B2B.
And that come back as well to one of our predictions. Like people won't be willing to pay for more privacy, but they will expect the software that they choose to have good practice in terms of privacy. So it's not necessarily the concept of paying more, but it will be accounted in their choice, and they will expect that it's there by default.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And I think go ahead, Olivier. Sorry, I just wanted to. It had to happen somewhere in the discussion. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was so it got me thinking about major bugs that major security bugs we've seen in the past few weeks. What do you think about the recent Log4j? So what does it show any trends that you would predict?
For me, I don't remember government closing all this website like all of a sudden. Like in my life, I don't think it ever happened before. So it was kind of new for me.
So I think the Log4j bug is going to be a wake-up call for the industry that dependency management. And so I think when there's a big bug like this that comes out, the first thing you're thinking about is where to start. And with a bug like Log4j, it was literally everywhere. It runs in databases. It runs in many legacy software. It runs so anything that was in Java was affected, and so knowing where to start is really hard. And if I have to make a prediction, it's going to be that so dependency management software is going to improve in the next few years. I think one of the hard challenges too that is new to the past few years is that everything moving to containerized applications, and so now you like patching bugs like this is much harder than it was a couple of years ago, because now it's running like in 12 different containers on the same machine, and it's running on it's running on applications where you don't even control necessarily the build system. So you patching it inside containers is hard. Maybe you're not the one that produces the image. So, and just knowing what apps you're running that are affected is also hard, because you need to have good dependency management tooling to know that it's running inside that container running on that machine.
Yeah, I think to some of the points that have been discussed, I tend to agree with you, Olivier, that I haven't seen a shutdown at this level of but it did happen. Like if we recall the Heartbleed and Shell Shock, that was kind of the similar vulnerability that affected a lot of product, and it was tough to basically understand where it was, and it was all over the place. And I think to
but it was targetable to entry points, right?
It was exactly. As opposed to Log4j, you don't know where your logs ends up at the end and where it's triggered, even though that is really tricky. I fully agree with you. But I've seen some websites being targeted. But I'm putting this Log4j incident in the same kind of category of oh shit moment in terms of cybersecurity, of okay, it's all over the place. It's tough because we have an asset management. We know which IT infrastructure we have. We may know which vulnerability we have into those infrastructure. We may be aware to know some more advanced, more mature company may know which software is running on which machine, where. But at Log4j, it's like which software or Java or which technology that I bought.
It's an indirect dependency, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the big difference. It's like usually, so you have with Heartbleed, you had like this version of Nginx. Now it's not necessarily this version of Elasticsearch. It's like this version of Elasticsearch running in that runtime. So this is where dependency management becomes really important. Is that just knowing that you have the database running and what version of the database is no longer enough. It has to be. Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry. And I think you raised a good point about the container. Like you basically have one physical machine that is in reality like a ton of small logical machines.
Which can run a lot of containers, in fact. Sometimes not even run by you.
If I can make another comment about Log4j, so one thing I noticed is I hope that it will be the start of a shift in the industry where everybody starts like taking responsibilities for libraries like Log4j. So Log4j is handling the logs of millions of machines around the world in like probably hundreds of thousands of companies or more, and it's a software that is developed by almost a single person is in his free time before the incident, and with no funding. So I think this brings an important problem that we have with the open source libraries sometimes, is that funding is hard, especially with indirect dependencies like this. So if you're talking about the database that uses Log4j, they usually have large orgs and everybody's willing to take responsibilities, but nobody's taking responsibilities for the small core libraries that everybody's standing on.
All for more funding into open source, and I think it's good if organizations contribute to that, either by the time they invest in some of the project or financial investment. I think it's a bit of a shortcut to say that it's like Log4j was vulnerable because it was an open source project that don't have a lot of funding. We've seen a lot of like remember the CBA that was used for the ransomware attacks in 2021. It was like Exchange that being targeted, Citrix that was targeted, like the VPN technology that was targeted as well as an entry point. So we've seen a lot of those big software developed by large company, large organization, also like vulnerable and having some critical vulnerabilities.
So the problem, the solution is not. I'm not saying the solution is only has to be throwing money at software. And it's not only throwing money at security, right? So it has to be a balance of both. And right now there's no balance. So so we have the libraries that have almost no funding, and we're putting a lot in security. So like there has to be a point where, if you know that you're running Log4j and if you have this strong dependency management software, maybe you still need to start contributing a little bit. And I think so. With libraries like this, it's hard because you're not gonna make like many small donations to all of the libraries that are supporting your company. I think there has to be open source organizations that start organizing around general funding in open source.
Like something like Apache Foundation?
Yeah, so these are already set up, but I think they need. So I read recently a suggestion about this. I'm not saying it's a good solution, but we were talking. Like there are music labels that. So you can just buy licenses to music labels, and you can use songs from all kinds of artists, and then they care about redistributing the money to the different artists. Maybe this needs to happen in open source too.
Yeah.
What form exactly? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think you write a good article, blog post on that. If you mind sharing it in the chat, I think it could be relevant for everyone. Yeah. So what is the solution to all of the cybersecurity problems, Olivier? Is it AI?
Yeah. So do you think it's artificial intelligence? So I would say no, and I will start with a statement: is artificial intelligence won't replace your security team. And I think in order to understand this, we need to understand what is AI, because there's a lot of marketings, and sometimes we get confused. Is it machine learning? Is it like natural language processing? And I think the best like definitions is it is tools in order to make decisions. And in terms of cybersecurity, we saw that artificial intelligence is pretty good, in fact, to process a large quantity of data. So what does that mean for your team is you can focus on more complex tasks. And this is quite a good thing. Do you have thought on this, Mathieu or Alex? Or
like, it's a tools and it needs to be applied to specific problems. Like, you don't have a magic bullet with AI. You cannot, like, it's definitely some interesting capacity. With the solution like ours, where we have a ton of data, it's definitely some use case that we're seeing, but it's as well, it's supporting the analyst. Like, there's how we can use technology in order to remove some of the burden on the analyst, so they can focus on what is not feasible by AI and what is more complex. Yeah. And I think I'm seeing, like, I'm usually do the parallel between a surgeon and the cybersecurity analyst, where they can have AI capacity in order to support and assist them. So, like,
AI this is what I see will be happening in 22. And we saw AI is pretty good to detect patterns too in complex data. So we saw artificial intelligence to monitor some networks. So if a malicious actors have a bad behavior, we can like restrict his access. And some credit cards company are using artificial intelligence to detect malicious transactions. And what I see in 22 is the real, like, not only detect malicious transaction now, but maybe detecting more complex frauds in the banking systems. Like we saw the PCU fraud, maybe AI can detect this type of frauds and all this kind of stuff, because it's kind of complex.
So so you think AI is going to be applied more and more to behavior detection in different areas?
Yeah, behavior detection and like raise some flags. So I think there's something there. It won't like, I think it would just like raise some flags, so your security team will have to investigate.
We have an interesting question, I think, from Eric in the chat. So I guess I'd like to hear your take on this, Olivier. Do you see malicious actors also starting to use AI or machine learning to pick targets and maybe execute?
Yeah, I kind of see article, but it's kind of controversial. But there's malicious actors that can use AI in order to produce malware. But like I say, it's kind of controversial because we don't know. But like, I don't know if you know the tools to produce images, like with artificial intelligence, but now we can produce software. So we can ask the AI, the artificial intelligence, based on some malware to produce new malwares. But I think Mathieu has a thought on this.
Well,
because
I'm more convinced about the behavior-based detection protection that could be bypassed through AIs, because the concept of AI is all based on past data and past baseline that you can provide to the learning algorithm in order to produce an output that is valuable. So through behavior analytics, bypassing and mimicking a real human through a lot of past data that you haven't accumulated, we can get to that point. I'm joking on it a little bit and saying that at some point the AI may be able to pass the Turing test to order capture.
We don't know, but
it's I'm seeing more. I'm more inclined to that direction of behavior.
There's a thing. AI can be tricks, and we saw it tricks every day. Like when you receive like a spam email is because AI had been tricks with. So hackers, if hackers have information on how you implement your AI, he can like tricks and he can know how to bypass the artificial intelligence like layers.
Yeah, it's an understanding of the models, and I think it's a cat and game. Like, if you can use AI in order to produce outcome that haven't been seen by the defending AI, that is, it's a bit physical in terms of thinking, but that's probably where we can see AI being used by malicious actors. Quite frankly, I would tend to say that the first appearance of AI being used by bad guys and malicious actors are through bypassing behavior-based detection system.
Exactly. Yeah. So behavior-based detection is going to be like an arms race. So you have AI detecting spam, AI generating spam. You have AI like detecting fake profiles and fake user input on social websites, and then you have AI generating more realistic and even more realistic user input and profiles. So this, I can see this area evolving to a point where AI, where malicious AI gets pretty sophisticated in the next few years.
Yeah, because I mean, AI is good to detect weird pattern, unusual behavior, or unusual detection. So if you can,
and it's also good to create usual looking patterns. So
yeah, because
yeah, and I think it's always coming back to the cat and mouse of how you can fit it into a normal pattern, and what is the new unusual pattern that could be detected by AI, and kind of this ongoing race of fitting into attacking AI, trying to fit into the normal flow, and defending AI, trying to detect more and more unusual flow through additional variable or characteristic.
And this is why I think. Continue, Alex. Sorry.
I think there's a fit with dependency management here. I can see in the next year more standards that describe, and I don't know what containers contain. So not just scanning, but also I can see container images having standards to explain what they have, what they're running, serving as input maybe to data analytics tools. And
that's a good point. I mean, the concept of asset management and dependency management and inventory of asset is crunching a lot of data and classifying this ton of data. So yeah, could we use AI there? Probably we could use there's some way. Yeah,
we will be assisted by AI, I think, in all our daily jobs in the future. So we'll have to, every job, I think.
I think
every basic job maybe, or
yeah. I think one question that I think we need to answer here, and there's a lot of discussion in the cyberspace about the concept of automatic remediation. Looks like we tend to agree that it's not necessarily coming in 2022, but I'm still curious to see what do you see happening in terms of automatic remediation made by AI.
I want to see it, but so I think. So I guess it depends what you consider as remediation. If we're I think Olivier was talking a little bit earlier about AI already being used to, I don't know, deny a credit card transaction. This is a little bit of remediation. So it's detecting the bug, preventing the transaction from happening. I think these areas are realistic, that things like this we can see soon, and we already see. But more complex remediation, I don't know. It's not gonna start. I don't think we'll see this year AI patching Log4j. We might see things detection in maybe WAFs. I'm trying to think could a WAF could an AI empowered WAF have seen the rise of people trying to exploit Log4j and raise flags? What do you think about that, Mathieu?
I think what we see, I think definitely in terms of the Log4j, I think yes, in terms of WAF and IDP and behavior-based detection, it's a patch you can put in place while you're trying to really fix the problem at heart. And I think this is what we've seen in most of the incident response of the organization, of quickly putting some rules in the intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, web application firewall, in order to detect some pattern and some payload that are well known or were discovered through cyber threat intelligence and indicator of compromission. So basically looking at how the cyber criminals are actually leveraging that vulnerability, knowing doing some signature and putting those signature in those watch list into a WAF. I think here AI could definitely do something in terms of behavior, as similar to what we've seen with
a watch list, but this is not necessarily going ahead and fixing there are no areas where fixing the problems can easily be done by AI right now.
In 2022,
I think no.
Well, some people can prove us wrong, and
it's
happy to. But I think what I'm trying to make as a parallel is right now IDS, web application firewall, intrusion detection system are kind of using some signature and some patterns matching in order to detect an attacks. As like, if I might do the parallel with AV, we're doing it like a few years ago, as opposed to now that we have EDR that are more like behavior-based detection. I think we can have some kind of a machine learning, some component of AI in the defensive approach into those first line of defense of detecting patterns and detecting behavior that could be blocked right away, based not only on pattern matching and signature, but also on the behavior base and some alternative pattern that looks like signature that we know already. So I think there's some capacity of AI in terms of the web application firewall IDS that could be put in place quicker than seeing AI being able to actually fix the issue and patch the different system. We did touch a little bit on the question from Felix on the chat about the good practice with dependency management. I think we touch it in a way like, hey, we can see in predictions AI being leveraged in order to cluster and to classify the information. But right now, waiting for those technology, what is a good practice in terms of dependency management, and what would you recommend to company? Maybe Alex, I'm turning it to your way.
Well, I think what we've already said has to be repeated. So good inventory management is really important. So you have to know what you're running, and what we discovered with Log4j is that it's no longer enough to know that you're running this version of this database. You have to know it's running where and in what runtime and with what libraries it's using. And then there is there is already the existing vulnerability scanning software. So you need to implement that, having all of knowing what runs and what container and what vulnerability you're exposed to, and then also focus on mastering the build system for these apps. Are you able to patch? If there is if there's something like Log4j that comes tomorrow in this app, are you able to patch, or do you have to wait for a vendor? And what are the workarounds? So the difference with bugs like Heartbleed, I think we've said before, is that usually you control the web server in front of all of your in front of your infrastructure, but you don't control where your logs end up.
But in that regard, you still need to wait for the deployment, the fix in terms of Heartbleed for the vendor.
It's usually faster for a web server to release than for 25 Java apps to release. So try to orgs have to try to empower themselves in knowing what they run, where to start when something happens. And
one thing I would like to add on in terms of asset management, I think it's nice that I think you should do it. Start to try to map all of your asset and basically have a full inventory of your asset. But I think it's also technology that are continuous discovering of footprint and your technology from an outside perspective can complement that asset management that you know. So technology that scan your infrastructure, that try to leverage OSINT technique in order to find what is your property from an external point of view can supplement an existing asset management that you're doing from an internal perspective as well. So I think having it's a concept of multiple layers in cybersecurity in order to discover more. So having some discovery tools or technology that try to map the footprint from an external perspective can be added to the asset management that you're doing from an internal perspective. I think
I agree.
Thank you for asking the question in the chat. Super interesting, two good questions. We are arriving to an end of this discussion. If you have a last question, it's the last time to ask it on the chat. Other than that, I think we can maybe round up and do one, if everyone in Alex or Olivier have a last prediction for 2022, generally speaking. I'll be curious to hear about it.
I don't think the Canadians will win the Stanley Cups in 22.
Fair enough.
I don't necessarily have a top prediction, but I think I've linked in the chat a couple minutes earlier while Olivier was talking the article that I was talking about. So making open source economy more viable with dual license collectives. So it's not necessarily a prediction, but it's a wish list. So I wish that these areas improve this year.
Perfect. Thank you very much. on my side, if you like, I think I will just kind of in place on the concept of it's a cyber resilience. I think it's a common prediction, and I think it's true. I think going back to the basic asset management, knowing what you run on which software, because technology will be targeted, and organizations that have a better patch level and a better vulnerability management will be shining compared to the other organization. And I think that is the last thing. The last prediction is yes, you can have some training for the user, and yes, you need to continue to train the user, but you also need to add tools in place and technology control in order to respond when someone will do an error, because it will happen. Like, it's good that you continue to train the user, it's good to continue to invest in cyber training, but you also need to have some technology control in place to constrain the attack when it will happen.
Yeah, and I think my final prediction, we will start to see less marketing on artificial intelligence and more like real product using artificial intelligence. Like, there's been a lot of marketing and we kind of don't know what AI stands for because of this. So maybe 22 will be the years we will release real artificial intelligence powered product.
Awesome. So I think that concludes our fireside chat. Thank you so much, Mathieu, Olivier, Alex, for sharing your insights with us. It was a really lively discussion and I really enjoyed watching. And to everyone who attended, if you'd like to further the discussion, please email us at hello@flare.systems. We'd be glad to further the discussion. And thanks again, and everyone have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.